Hi, this is Lorraine Watry, and this is a watercolor demo of a garden scene, part 3. We finished up last time. I had painted in a portion of the scene, and I'm just explaining to the class what I did in the last painting. So I'm telling them that I added a little bit to the photograph that I took at the Denver Botanic Gardens to give it a little bit more space at the top, and then I decided to start the scene by painting in the lighter grasses of the fescue. And I could have started in other places, but I decided that that being the lighter part, I would start there and kind of work around the painting from that. So now I'm getting out some colors that I will use for the pinks of the flowers that are in the scene. And I first pulled out quinacridone magenta. That was permanent rose right there. And then I get out a little bit of opera. And I also think I pull out a little bit of a cobalt blue, even though I don't think I show that, just as a way to tone the pinks down a little bit and have a little bit of shadow color if I want it. And basically what I'm doing is just reaching around to those pinks and getting different amounts of the different colors so that I can vary what's going on in that area. The other thing that I want to do while I'm working on the pinks of the flowers is I want to continue to have a varied edge around the grasses and the pots so that they don't become too stiff and they look like they're kind of integrated within each other. I'm painting dry on dry for most of this right now, so the paper is dry and I'm just using my wet watercolor to get the paint on there. Those are small enough areas that I don't really need to pre-wet. The only reason that you might pre-wet that area is if you want it to, the colors to sort of flow into each other or to have a softer area. And you'll notice that even though I'm using a large brush, that's a Golden Fleece number 38, the largest, and it's the Cheap Joe's, which is an online supply house or supply company that you can order watercolor brushes and paints and paper and all of that from. I'm staying up on the tip of that brush a lot of the time, and I use it almost in a calligraphic type way. I'm making little marks and things like that. I can also fill it with quite a lot of paint so that if I need to paint a larger area, it gives me that option to have enough time to get the paint down and not have to keep reaching over and get more paint. But I do use a lot up on the tip of the brush. So you notice in that section right there that I did do some pre-wetting, and it was because it was a larger area. I wanted the color to remain wet, and then also I didn't pre-wet the whole area. I just kind of dabbed on some water throughout that area, and that allows that area to have some softer areas and some harder edged areas. And I did some negative painting around the grasses below, and I was pointing that out right there. So I'm talking about just having a random edge right in there. So that's something you need to be aware of when you're working around grasses or foliage or something you've already painted. So that is one of the techniques in watercolor, is to paint negatively. And the other thing I was telling the students was that the edges of a lot of my grasses have masking on them, and so then when I am done with a particular section of the pink area or whatever is behind the grasses, I can then pull the masking off and I will soften those edges, or I may add some color to them. I may clean them up. Masking can sometimes be harsh and not look correct. It may look like it's fake. So I often will go in and either clean them up or adjust to those masked areas. Sometimes I'll leave them white, and then sometimes I will actually put paint into that area. So by masking those areas, then I can paint behind them, and I don't have to worry about trying to paint around each individual little grass blade that might be sticking up over something else. My pinks are close in value and color, but having a little bit of change in there by using different pinks or adding a little bit of blue here and there to cool them down with kind of a purple color still adds some interest. And this is sort of my first layer or pass of color, and so then I can still come back and add some more texture or adjust those and make some flowers in there. One thing to think about is that I am trying to paint those areas in more of a mass of color. I'm not trying to paint each individual little flower that might be in those, partly because those are in the background, but also because I want it's an overall feeling of the garden, not necessarily each individual little flower that I'm trying to portray. One thing I do in those areas is I leave some white, and those are just little sparkles of white paper that show through. And sometimes I'll do those areas for a particular reason to then come back in and paint like a center of a flower or something like that. But sometimes they're just little sparks of white paper that help the whole scene have a little more transparency and glow about it. So you can kind of see the outline of the pots kind of cascading down the hillside there. And right now I have the edges of those pots masked. And I can then, when I'm done working around them, I can come back in and pull that masking off and paint those pots. But for right now, that just protects them, and I can work without having to worry about messing up those edges. So the area that I'm kind of in right now, I am going to have that foreground pot that's down on that kind of right corner area, and some of the flowers down in there be a little more in focus. They'll be a little more my center of attention. But because of how the pots lay out on the hillside, I'm not necessarily concerned with having one really main center of interest. It's sort of kind of, I want your eye to move around the whole scene, and a lot of times with a landscape you'll have several centers of interest. So I'm kind of talking about that right there, and where those, if you divide your paper into three, both directions, where those lines cross over, those are good places to put your center of interest, and that's called a golden mean or golden rule. There's different names for it, but and then my pots also are in sort of an S curve. That's a nice compositional way to lay out your scene, used quite widely. So I'm talking to the class about that a little bit. And I will continue working on this painting, and I hope you return for part 4. And it's coming along pretty good now, and I'll start adding more layers and more of the green grasses. And thanks for following along. If you'd like to find out more information about watercolor, follow my blog at lorrainewatchery.blogspot.com. Thanks.